से पजाय मम अथा पजाय इच्छामि हको क्योंकि मुनि से पजा मम अथा पजाय इच्छामि हको क्योंकि सवे नहित सुखे न हिदलोकिका पालालोकिकायं मुनि से पजा मम अथा पजाय इच्छामि हको क्योंकि सवे नहित सुखे नहिद लोकिका पललोकिकायं मुनि से पजा मम अथा पजाय इच्छामि हको क्योंकि.
Thank you for your patience.
Now we are ready for questions.
Completely new to this area. I'm a scientist by training. So just something's puzzled me. The painting of Sanghamitra with the Bodhi tree and Devanampiyasa receiving it, they were all portrayed as fairly light-skinned. So how did that thinking percolate into that painting? And this was perhaps more recent. Another, if I may discuss, one of the sculptures you showed of Ashoka, where you pointed out he was kind of weary or frail and even paunchy. I'm just wondering, how did great emperors permit this? Was there not perhaps a system of previewing what was going to be carved? I mean, how is it possible that somebody permits himself to be shown like this when he's... I'm sorry, very naive questions. Thank you for those questions.
So you're absolutely right. That is a new painting. It's from Jambukola Patuna, which has actually nothing ancient. It is, it's a modern painting. And on the question of, yeah, you're right. I mean, Alexander the Great, for instance, when accounts of his military movements had to be sent back to Greece, used to vet every word before it was sent. But remember, this is much after the time of Emperor Ashoka. This is centuries after. Ashoka is 3rd century BC. The gateway is 1st century CE. So that's why, yeah. He wouldn't have allowed it, I'm sure. But in the time of Ashoka, you never had portraiture of rulers. Ashoka is only visible to us through his words.
Hello. I was just wondering, the wide range of these Ashokan edicts, does this mean that there was a common language across a very large part of India?
So, as far as the language which is most commonly used across the Indian subcontinent in the Ashokan edicts, that is Prakrit. It's the administrative language. So it's a language which Ashok's administrators understood. Now, I'm sure in the actual, words being conveyed to the larger audience, when a written exemplar was used, I don't think in most cases you could read off the stone because it was spread over a very large area. It would have been translated into the local language. Now, again, something may have been lost in the translation, but I think that was the process. On the other hand, if you go to Afghanistan, there it is Greek and Aramaic which are used. And that again is because that region was more familiar with those languages. Does that answer your question? Yeah. And the focus is on hearing. Emperor Ashoka is asking his people, his subjects, to hear his words. So it was obviously read out by an official, from a written exemplar and must have been translated locally.
Thank you. Thank you for that talk. We are in the Asiatic society, so I wanted to ask you this question. The kind of received wisdom that we have is that Ashoka lived, was the big emperor across a large swath of India, but then was forgotten until he was rediscovered by Princeps and Cunningham and all of these people in the 1800s. First of all, is this narrative true? And secondly, if it is, why so?
So I'm glad you mentioned the Asiatic Society. Just before this, I was asking Paul Abraham to, ascertain if I was correct in thinking that this was Bhagwan Lal Indraji. And Paul said it was. Bhagwan Lal Indraji was the discoverer of one of the Calcutta, what is called the Calcutta Berat Edict of Ashoka, and also the Supara Edicts. Now, coming to your, question, the Ashoka of the edicts was forgotten, but Emperor Ashoka was not forgotten. So even if you look at his remembrance across India, I've only been able to offer a few vignettes, but Emperor Ashoka figures in the accounts of Fahian and Xuanzang, the Chinese pilgrims, who tell us many folk stories that were told to them around even the pillars of Emperor Ashoka. At Sarnath, you have a queen in the medieval period, the queen of King Govind Chandra of Kanauj, who actually says that she is renovating structures there to make them as they were in the time of Dhamma Ashoka. Ashok is mentioned in Kalhan's Rajtarangini in Kashmir, and he's mentioned there as the founder of Srinagari, and also as somebody who put up stupas but set up Shaiv shrines as well. And Ashok finds mention also in the Ain Akbari of Abul Fazl. I'm not even mentioning texts like the Purans, where you have lists of the Maurya, so where Ashok figures. So Ashok is not a forgotten emperor in India. But the emperor that we remember today is mainly through his words on rocks, on stones, and on pillars. And the language was known, but the script in which that language was, had been forgotten. So that script was finally, it was discovered, it was found by, what the meanings of all, the Brahmi characters were by James Pritzep, who then, was able to put out the texts of the Ashokan inscriptions. So that is as far as the discovery or the rediscovery of Ashoka goes. So you're quite right, Ashoka was not, a forgotten man. And he was certainly not forgotten all over East Asia, Southeast Asia, and so on and so forth.
Thank you very much, Professor, for your talk. A question on the figurine which had the two or three ladies on either side, which is on your book cover. You said one was the queen. What is it that signifies that this person is a queen?
This is the Sanchi one you're talking
Sanchi
about?
one.
Yeah. So if you see, the royal parasol is there. So, when the parasol is covering a woman and a man, you would say that this is the king and the queen.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Professor. Closer to college, we used to have the Ashokan pillar. We still do Bada Hindu Rao, which is, I think, now broken in half. And then we have Firoz Shah Kotla also, which has probably been brought in at the time of Firoz Shah Tughlaq. Not a very prominent king, in the larger history of India, definitely prominent then. Do you think that they had something to do with the concept of kingship, that he lugged them all the way from Meerut to Allahabad and brought them and installed them, which would have been in his capital? And Was there some occasion to remember this great king 1300 years after his existence in a script which is no longer known to people?
So, if you read the account of Firoz Shah Tughlaq bringing the pillars, there seems to be a great fascination with the surface. As we know that they have this shining surface, mirror-like surface. So the glittering columns are described. And I'm sure that was one of the things that attracted Firoz Shah Tughlaq. But I think he did imagine that this was put up by a king. And that's the reason why he tried to get the words of Ashok on the pillars deciphered, unsuccessfully, of course. He got many Brahmins and learned scholars there, and nobody could decipher it. And then one Brahmin said that what he had read on the inscription was that it would only be a great king who would be able later to get this pillar here, which of course was just flattering Firoz Shah Tughlaq. But that Tughlaq did think that there was something about a royal in association with this pillar is also suggested by the fact that he actually put up something that resembled the globe that is, associated with Alexander in relation to, the pillar that is there at Firoz Kotla. It no longer exists, but in the descriptions it is there. So it's a way of, assuming greatness by including all kinds of elements there. And of course, today that pillar is seen as part of being, in a kind of place visited by jinns and so on and so forth. It's considered to be a kind of Lat Baba. It also, there are Ashokan pillars. So, there are just so many stories, one can't tell all of them. But it used to, Ashokan pillars everywhere used to be called Bhim Ki Lat or Bhim Ki Chhadi. So, the Mahabharat tradition was married into the Ashokan pillars. Yes, of course.
This is to do with the Bhagavan Sharma. And we showed the bibliology. My question was the period, what was the date of Rajkumar? Because if I remember, I happened that it was a while ago, and it's impossible to photograph those paintings. Is there another temple in Bagan which has got power period paintings? Or is this the one?
These are not Pala paintings.
These are actually.
This is, 11th century. Yeah.
Sorry?
11th century of the common era. Yeah. But
are these 11th century paintings?
These are 11th
so
century.
then it's the same I think it's the same temple. And could you give me so Rajkumar was the 11th century prince.
Yes. He was the son of Kyanzitta, 11th to 12th century. Yeah.
And do we know if any connection with the was
Well, I'm sure there were connections. But for me, I don't think in India you have any Buddhist temple of that time with paintings like this. So for me, the interesting thing was to see where the inspiration of the stories came from, which came from Sri Lanka. It's not directly from India. And that there is the story of Rajkumar himself, who, is this hugely accomplished scholar, a prince who will never be king, but who decides then to devote his time to, Theravada scholarship, and who then puts up all these paintings. So the Ananda temple, of course, is of Anuruddha's time. Yeah.
Excuse me. What sort of response did Brahminical ideas have towards? What sort of response did Brahminical ideas have towards the ideas of Ashoka? I mean, there is this book by D.N. Jha, Against the Grain, which talks of how the rise of Brahminical ideas destroyed Buddhism. Can you please think aloud about this?
I personally don't think that it was Brahmanical ideas or Hinduism with the patronage of strong rulers who, which was responsible for the death of Buddhism. In fact, Buddhism never died. Uh, it declined, but it remained very alive and well, both in certain parts of Bengal and Odisha, uh, and also in the north, in the Himalayas, and so on and so forth. And even if you look at the chronology in South India of Buddhism, it doesn't match up to what is happening in the heart of North India. Now, on the question of how Brahmins responded to Buddhism, I think for a long time there's just a Brahmanical silence about them. So, they pretended as if they didn't exist. Later, of course, there is a response, and over time, the Buddha is made into an avatar of Vishnu. So, there is that integration. Now, why did Buddhism decline? Of course, the political onslaughts is one part of the story. But otherwise, if you lose your lay support, if people, and there are just so many people across the board, when you look at places all over India, the kinds of donors that were there for the Buddhist faith, it's the ordinary people of ancient India who actually supported Buddhism in a major way. Kings also did. I think when that dried up, uh, why why did that dry up? It may partly have been because Buddhism became a lot like Hinduism in terms of, if you just look at what is associated with Buddhist monuments and so on and so forth. Take Taxila, for example. In the early monasteries, you will not have a kitchen and a refectory and so on because you were supposed to beg for your food. And if you look at the later monasteries, they're extremely rich and, have all the sorts of things that you associate with a monastic community that is doing very well for itself.
Hello, thank you, ma'am, for the entire lecture. This is just what we have studied. Like Chandragupta Maurya, who was supposed to be the grandfather of Ashoka, he was a devout, Jain who goes to South India, and that leads to the schism in Jainism. But how come there is a sudden transition, in the family that suddenly there is Buddhism, getting into it?
Okay, that's a good question. So, as far as Chandragupta is concerned, so this is a legend that he, was converted and he became a Jain at the end of his life. But remember what we know of Chandragupta in terms of contemporary sources, it's only from the fragments of the account of Megasthenes, the fragments of Indica that have survived. And you have nothing there at all. Unlike Ashok, neither Chandragupta or his son Bindusar, the second emperor, ever put down their words in a way that would have made them survive, as in the case of Ashok. But one thing that you do see is that the Maurya court was a place where all kinds of ideas came up. There was an interest in, various religions. If Chandragupta became, in the end of his life, a Jain, think of the story about Bindusar, who is supposed to have asked for a sophist, along with figs and wine from the classical world. And he was told, of course, that a sophist is not something that you can buy. So that's one part. And then you have Ashok becoming a Buddhist. But if you were to ask me why this sudden change to Buddhism, remember his spouse, his most beloved spouse, was Devi. Devi was always a Buddhist. No account will ever say that she converted to Buddhism. Now, we always underestimate the power of women. And I really think Because if he was turning away from violence, he could well have become a Jain, which is far more fundamentalist when it comes to non-violence. But why did he become a Buddhist? What is it that is Buddhist in his immediate familial world? It's, the woman in his life, Devi. So that's why he became a Buddhist.
Ma'am, what is your fascination with Ashok that you've been doing so many books on him? What is it that makes you write so
Well,
much
I
about him?
really think he was a communicator par excellence. To think of the third century BC and a ruler wanting to be heard by his subjects, in his own voice, and putting his words into stone in a way that we can hear them today. He must have put a lot of thought into this. This is one thing. But the second is that look at his ideas. I'm not saying that that's how the Maurya state was governed. But if you just look at what he's talking about, he's the first ruler, for example, who puts up an environmental edict where, the whole thing of having, Homo sapiens sapiens on the top and not thinking of anybody else is completely overturned. It's interested in living beings and saving all kinds of living beings. Today also, we think, or at least some people think of the environment, but it is because so much is disappearing. In the case of Ashok, it's coming out of deep compassion, a compassion for living beings. Then you think of Ashok being the pioneer of soft diplomacy, putting up. So he's ambitious. Let's not think that because he gave up warfare, there were no other engagements. He's very, very ambitious. And what does he do? He sets up hospices and wells and other facilities, not just in his land, but beyond his lands. So there are just many things. He talks about how, reporters can come and tell him about what's happening in his realm anywhere, in the haram, even when he's eating and so on. I'm sure nobody dared to do that. But the point is, when people heard this message, they would have said that, gosh, here is a ruler who's putting his words down, not because he wants more taxes or because he wants us to, he wants conscriptions in the army, or he's threatening us. He's actually only threatened the Sangha, right? And he's threatened forest people. He's threatened the Atavis. So, but there is all this there. So it's for those reasons that, I've been fascinated. The second book, of course, I must tell you, also has something to do, this book, Searching for Ashok, that I joined Ashoka University. And we all faculty get an annual grant, a pretty generous grant from the university. And I thought to myself, what would be value addition to the university? And I'd been deeply fascinated by the remembrance of Ashok. So I used my faculty grants. I've traveled all over Myanmar, Thailand, Sri Lanka, etc., with the money that my university just normally gives. I've never spent it on seminars and all. I just feel that I can always read books and find out what happens in these great seminars. But this kind of travel, is something I wanted to do. So it has something to do with my transition to Ashoka University, is it?
Hello, ma'am. I would like to ask you a question. Before asking a question, I would like to set a pretext for it. Culture exists if more people are willing to follow it. Culture is a way of accepting a way of living. But masses follow the culture that supports their very survival. Any power, by power I mean an economic power, political power, or a military power. Any power that is capable of supporting their survival, the ideologies of that power is accepted. So my question in this context is that how is power, economics and culture interrelated with one another?
How are power, economics and culture? Well, I think political power can really impact cultural phenomena in the short term. because, you know, a ruler, or whether it's ancient or modern rulers, you know, they're not likely to be completely ignored by their subjects for all kinds of reasons. On the question of economics, I think in many instances, when rulers have tried to impose certain prescriptions and proscriptions, because of economics, those have not worked. So I'll give you an example from Emperor Ashoka. He really believed in compassion towards living beings and in reducing the killing of animals and not eating, animals as part of food or not sacrificing them. But if you look at the archaeological evidence from sites where you would date the levels, to Maurya times, in those levels, you find as much meat being consumed as before. So the number of bones that you find are practically the same. In Afghanistan, Emperor Ashoka says, "Oh, I asked them, and so all hunters have stopped hunting and all fishermen have stopped fishing." I mean, the Afghans must have laughed at the emperor. It's a strictly meat eating place. So,
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for your questions, and thank you, Professor Lahiri, for answering all of them.
and thank you, Sarmaya, for inviting me for this
Thank you.
lecture.
Thank you.
Subscribe to Sarmaya and be a part of the stories and conversations around art, history, and culture.